You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Enterprises today are using hundreds of SaaS apps. Are you reaping their productivity and innovation benefits, or are you lost in the sprawl? Enter Savvy Security. They help you surface every SaaS app, identity, and risk, so you can shine a light on shadow IT and risky identities. Savvy monitors your entire SaaS attack surface to help you efficiently eliminate toxic risk combinations and prevent attacks. So go on, get savvy about SaaS and harness the productivity benefits. Fuel innovation while closing security gaps. Visit savvy.security to learn more. Ransomware disrupts London hospitals. Researchers discover serious vulnerabilities in Progress Telerik report server and Atlassian Confluence data center. Over 3 million people are affected by a breach at a debt collection agency. A report finds rural hospitals vulnerable to ransomware. An Australian mining firm finds some of its data on the dark web. Google patches 37 Android vulnerabilities. Russian threat actors target the Summer Olympics in Paris. On our Industry Voices segment, we're joined by Sandy Bird, CTO at Sunray. Sandy discusses the risks of unused identity infrastructure. And the Amazon rainforest goes online. It's Tuesday, June 4th, 2024. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is your CyberWire Intel Briefing. Thanks for once again joining us. It is great to have you here with us. A ransomware attack on third-party provider Synovis has caused significant disruptions to pathology services at several London hospitals. This includes Guy's and St. Thomas NHS Foundation Trust, Royal Brompton and Harefield Hospitals, and King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, with primary care across southeast London also affected. The attack, which was detected on Monday, has resulted in the cancellation of operations and a critical incident emergency status being declared. This is due to the inability of healthcare professionals to access pathology services, including blood tests for transfusions. The disruption is having a significant impact on patient care, with urgent blood components only being transfused when critically indicated. The attack highlights the ongoing threat of ransomware attacks on the healthcare sector, which can have serious consequences for patients. In the UK alone, there have been 215 reported ransomware incidents in the healthcare sector since January of 2019. Authorities are concerned about the lack of reporting of such incidents and the impact on patients. The disruption is also expected to put additional pressure on other hospitals, potentially leading to further critical incidents being declared. Patients whose appointments have been canceled or redirected to other providers at short notice are likely to be particularly affected by the incident. Researchers have discovered a vulnerability chain that allows for remote code execution on Progress's Telerik report server. The chain involves an insecure deserialization flaw and an authentication bypass issue. An attacker can exploit these flaws to create a malicious report, allowing them to execute arbitrary code on the server. The vulnerabilities have been assigned a high CVSS score of 9.9 and 9.8, respectively. A proof of concept script has been published, and it is strongly recommended that users patch these flaws as soon as possible. The latest version of Report Server addresses both issues. Meanwhile, a critical remote code execution vulnerability has been discovered in Atlassian Confluence data center and server. The flaw allows unauthenticated attackers to exploit account privileges and execute arbitrary code with no user interaction required. The vulnerability is due to insufficient input validation in the Add a New Language function of the Configure Code macro section. To exploit this flaw, an attacker must have access to the vulnerable network, privilege to add new macro languages, and upload a forged JavaScript file. Atlassian recommends upgrading to the latest version to fix the vulnerability. Financial Business and Consumer Solutions, FBCS, is a nationally licensed debt collection agency that collects commercial and consumer debts on behalf of creditors. They've filed a data breach notification affecting over 3.2 million individuals. The exposed data includes full names, social security numbers, birth dates, account information, driver's license or state ID numbers, and medical claims information. In some cases, the compromised data also includes health insurance information. The company has sent breach notifications to those affected, offering 12 months of free credit monitoring. A new report from CSC 2.0, an offshoot of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, warns that rural hospitals are particularly vulnerable to ransomware attacks due to their limited resources and outdated technology. The report finds that federal funding is crucial to addressing this issue, as it will allow for major cybersecurity investments. The threat is no longer theoretical, with recent attacks on large healthcare providers, including Ascension and Change Healthcare, disrupting patient care and medical procedures. The report recommends increasing funding for the Department of Health and Human Services, updating cybersecurity objectives, and encouraging healthcare providers to invest in basic cybersecurity measures such as employee training and managed IT services. Australian rare earths firm Northern Minerals reported that some of its data was released onto the dark web after detecting a cybersecurity breach months ago. The stolen information includes corporate and financial data, personnel details, and shareholder info. The company detected the breach in March 2024, but only recently learned that the stolen data is now available on the dark web. Northern Minerals has informed Australian authorities of the theft. This comes just a day after Australia's government ordered China-affiliated investors to sell their shares in the firm due to concerns over national interest. Google has released its June 2024 Android security update, which patches 37 vulnerabilities, including multiple high-severity elevation of privilege bugs. The update resolves 19 issues in the framework and system components, with 7 flaws leading to local escalation of privileges. Additionally, 18 more vulnerabilities were addressed in kernel, imagination technologies, and ARM components, with 3 critical Qualcomm-specific flaws. The update is recommended for all devices running Android to ensure security and prevent potential exploits. The Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, MTAC, has detected malicious disinformation campaigns by Russian-backed threat actors targeting the upcoming Summer Olympics in Paris. The goal is to denigrate the International Olympic Committee's reputation and create fear of violence breaking out during the Games. MTAC has tracked 2 main influence actors, Storm 1679 and Storm 1099, which have been using artificial intelligence-generated content to spread false information. Tactics include releasing a fake film, producing fake videos and press releases, and spreading fear of crime or violence through social media bots. One release even included an audio deepfake of the voice of actor Tom Cruise, falsely expressing his support. The campaigns are expected to intensify in the weeks leading up to the Olympics, with MTAC warning that Russian actors may try to exploit security concerns and create illusions of protests or real-world provocations. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Sandy Bird, Chief Technology Officer at Sunray. We're discussing the risks of unused identity infrastructure. Stay with us. And now, a word from our sponsor, Zscaler, the leader in cloud security. Cyber attackers are using AI in creative ways to compromise users and breach organizations. In a security landscape where you must fight AI with AI, the best AI protection comes from having the best data. Zscaler has extended its zero trust architecture with powerful AI engines that are trained and tuned by 500 trillion daily signals. Learn more about Zscaler Zero Trust Plus AI to prevent ransomware and AI attacks. Experience your world secured. Visit zscaler.com/zerotrustai. Are lengthy security reviews pulling attention away from your security program? With the largest network of trust centers, Vanta can help you streamline security reviews to win customer trust, save time, and close deals fast. Proactively demonstrate security by showcasing key resources like your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 and provide real-time evidence for passing controls. And when a security questionnaire is required, Vanta takes the first pass for you. Visit vanta.com/cyber to take a self-serve tour. That's vanta.com/cyber. Sandy Bird is Chief Technology Officer at Sunray. I recently caught up with him for our sponsored Industry Voices segment, where Sandy describes the risks of unused identity infrastructure.
Yeah, if we focus on moving workloads to the cloud, like deploying your new workloads in AWS, Azure, Google Compute Cloud, when we look at the actual identity space, about 92% of the identities that are deployed in those clouds have what we're going to call sensitive permissions, things that create and destroy infrastructure, poke holes in the networks, things like that. And 92% of them don't even use the ones that they're granted. So they've been granted to the identities don't need them. And we measured that over a fairly long period of time. And the longer you were deploying workloads in cloud, the worse it got.
Why is that? Is it safe to say this is over-provisioning?
There's definitely an over-provisioning aspect. I think there's an interesting thing if you look at the data report that we produced. The machine identities, by far and large, are the biggest percentage of this. I think there was a ratio of like 88% versus 12% of machine identities versus human identities when we looked at this. And I think it's a lot of times the developer building the application doesn't know what permissions they're going to need in the future. And so they just naturally over-permission that. In enterprise networks, the developers were always many levels kind of below the internet. There were boundary firewalls before they could expose anything. But in cloud, when they're building on AWS or they're building in GCP, they're really only one step away. And so these sensitive permissions expose a lot of risk that wouldn't necessarily be there in a typical enterprise network.
Is it also true that once access is given, it's rarely revoked?
Very rarely revoked. There's another part of that same data report, which is really interesting. We looked at identities. Sometimes we call them cyber litter. They're just identities that are there that are not being used at all. And if we used a 90-day window, was the identity active in the last 90 days? 61% of the identities and people that had been in cloud for more than 5 years were no longer used. That's a really high number.
Yeah, that is a high number. So how do people typically go about managing this? And what are the frustrations they bump up against?
We, for years, thought that the way people would manage these are using similar process to internal identities like leaver, mover, joiner scenarios, right? Somebody joins the company, you give them provisions, they leave the company, you take the provisioning away. But what was happening with all these machine identities were they aren't people, so they don't come into the HR system and leave the HR system. They just get left there alone. And we thought, well, that's easy. We'll just clean them up with automation, right? We'll write something that goes and finds them all, and then some sort of a utility that goes and then removes them after they have been dormant. What we found was people weren't willing to do that. And the reason why, it may be obvious, is that a lot of those identities, the person that actually wrote the code and put them in place may not even be with the company anymore. Mm-hmm. And the new person responsible for doing that in the cleanup doesn't know how to put them back after they've been taken away. And they're worried they're going to break a yearly report or something very important to the company. So there's this fear in removing them. And then some of them are actually legitimately there, but not supposed to be used. Sometimes we call them break class accounts or things that we use in cases of emergency. And so people don't want to turn those ones off. But because they don't have a good inventory of them, they don't know how to automate this process. And so we spent a lot of time kind of as we released this cloud permissions firewall to actually have a way of quarantining them, basically taking the permissions away so they can't be used right now. But if they need to be brought back, you could bring them back.
It reminds me of that old story about, the folks who find something in the server closet and they don't know what it does. And somebody says, well, unplug it. The person who needs it, they'll come, they'll tell you.
It's exactly. And this is exactly how that works in the cloud permission firewall. We basically cut them off as soon as they start to be used again. If they log in, if something assumes that role, whatever it is, we send a little message in Slack or Teams or whatever people use for their chat ops process saying, hey, this identity, which hasn't been used in 2 years, just woke up. Do you want to allow it to wake up? Yes or no? And you just simply answer it and away you go. And it works again. So
what are some of the challenges here then for people doing the right thing? I mean, you'd imagine you want to give people the least amount of privileges that they need. Is there just too much overhead to do that for most organizations?
I think there's two stories. One is where you've been in cloud for 5 years and you have a lot of technical debt you need to clean up, in which case, you're going to end up basically creating more work for the teams to clean it up, or you're starting net new in cloud, in which case you want to do it right from the start. And both stories are a little different, but they come back to the point that somebody has to care enough to do this, or if that's not the case, you need to put in some centralized controls to stop this. And we don't like centralized controls anymore. We want to distribute security to all of the individuals to do it right. But where some of these permissions are so sensitive in cloud, for the small subset that are really sensitive, they should be actually probably centrally be controlled with a really low friction way to, grant them and remove them basically instantly as people need them.
How often does someone get overprivileged or overprovisioned just based on status? The CEO, well, we're going to give that person everything.
We had this great story from a design partner we were working with, which said, and they happened to use Azure, so it was interesting, but they said basically the process was the same for somebody to ask for contributor, which is a fairly high role in the Azure world, as it was to ask for the least privileged role. So everybody just asked for a contributor because it was the same amount of work and approval process for both of them. There is also that scenario that you talk about where it's I'm the VP of engineering, so I need full access, even though I won't use it in those cases. I think it's interesting. I've seen a mix depending on the companies. Some companies, that absolutely is the case. And, you look at that company, you're like, oh, don't take away that access. That's so-and-so. They own this project. And even though they never use it, we have to leave them that access. And in other companies, people are actually more than willing to take those away and say, no, they don't need access. Let's turn that off. We'll tell them they haven't used it in a year and they're willing. So it's changing. I would say in the modern world, people are, not wanting to have all of this extra access hanging around.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems to me like perhaps even a framing issue of saying, we don't want to burden you with the responsibility of all of this extra access.
Yeah. There's some amount of risk in having it there. And I think, most executives today, if they've been through cybersecurity training and things, would know that they shouldn't have all this extra access hanging around.
Well, let's talk about some best practices then. I mean, you mentioned kind of the two scenarios, the folks who are coming into this with a bunch of technical debt, and then the people who are starting from a fresh, clean slate, if you will. Can you share some best practices for either of those situations?
Yeah, if you're coming in with a lot of technical debt, you need to basically have a little bit of a hammer approach to this, in that you need to take those really, really sensitive permissions and move them into a centralized control, like this cloud permissions firewall, where we can find all of the exemptions, we grant them back, but for the 92% that never use them, we just take them away and then give you a really low friction way to enable them if something needs them 2 weeks from now. If you're starting from scratch, what's really neat is if you put in these controls from day one, where those really sensitive permissions are already gated somehow, right? There has to be an approval to use them and things. You can let your developers run a little bit wild and yet still have control of the really sensitive permissions. But then where the really sensitive workloads are, you do a nice job on least privilege. And I think those are a good balance in those scenarios. But I always tell people, start with those completely unused identities. We see so many of them in our customers. It's insane. And the amount of privilege that they have that an attacker could use if they ever got a hold of them is insane. And so starting with those kind of, completely unused identities is the easiest first step.
How do you and your colleagues there at Sunray measure success here? I mean, when you've interacted with an organization and seen the things that they've done, what does it look like on the other side?
Yeah, years ago, we used to measure it in the number of identities that you got to least privilege. And when we were measuring things in the thousands, we were really excited. But when we kind of look at the world now and we realize that some of these customers have, 20,000 unused identities, 50,000 unused identities, measuring things in the thousands doesn't even help. And so now we measure success more in the number of controls that you can put in place and the number of, we call them zombie identities you can quarantine, because you can actually deal with the big numbers very, very quickly. And I think that's a better way to look at success.
Is it common that folks don't even know what they don't know? Like they're unaware of how many identities are just hanging out there, in the graveyard?
It's interesting. I think most people know. When you talk to them initially, like, oh yes, we definitely have that problem. What are you doing about it? Well, we have a project for that. And the problem is I think everyone knows that they're going to be able to deal with a human number fixing this problem. If you have 100 developers and you assign them each out 5 tickets, then you can get 500 things done. But that doesn't actually scale when you have a problem as big as you do. So you have a tendency to make it a Friday problem, not a Monday problem.
I see.
And we spent a lot of time when we were building this cloud permissions firewall with these central controls to say, how do we make this a Monday problem where you spend a couple hours with it, you solve the really big problem, and then that gives you more time to work on the other things that matter, right? And I think that's a win for people.
Yeah. It strikes me as being kind of also a shame-free way to deal with the situation. Right?
It is, exactly. Yep.
That's Sandy Bird, Chief Technology Officer at Sunray. Every day, your IAM tech debt grows. Your multi-generational services struggle to work together. Building an identity fabric can fix this. It makes all your identity tooling stronger and allows you to connect any app to any service you want to use, with zero coding, zero maintenance, and zero app downtime. Strata's identity orchestration platform separates the identity logic from your applications, so you can optimize existing IAM tools and manage them in a single control plane. Now, every vendor, standard, and architecture work together. In short, building your identity fabric means you can secure your non-standard apps, keep your complex access policies, retire outdated IDPs, and modernize in record time. So build your fabric with Strata Identity and get rid of tech debt for good. Visit strata.io/cyberwire, share your identity priorities, and receive a pair of AirPods Pro. Offer valid for organizations over 5,000 employees. Connect today at strata.io/cyberwire. And finally, there's an old Hollywood trope about the isolated village or jungle tribe that suddenly finds itself exposed to modern technology, and typically either hilarity or tragedy ensues. Heck, Star Trek has the prime directive to deal with this very thing. Well, thanks to Starlink satellite internet, a modern version of this is playing out. Alison Renault is a Brazilian anthropologist and researcher who's dedicated her career to studying and working with indigenous communities in the Amazon rainforest. She's also the intrepid benefactor who's traveled to the heart of the Amazonian jungle to document what happens when the small Marubo tribe in Brazil suddenly finds themselves with access to the internet. Renault provided the tribe with 20 Starlink systems to kickstart their journey into the digital domain. N2K Marabu, the tribe's leader, or boss as he calls himself, is excited about the prospect of getting online. He's already got his Amazon Prime account ready to go and is planning on binge-watching the entire season of The Great British Baking Show. Meanwhile, Alfredo Marubo, Enroque's rival, or arch-nemesis as he puts it, is less optimistic about the arrival of the internet. He's worried that it'll corrupt the tribe with its evil ways and turn them all into gamers. Interviews with other villagers echo common themes from around the world and from all walks of life. The internet is making these kids lazy. They don't want to go outside anymore. But of course, these grown-ups just don't understand. But seriously, the arrival of the internet in the Amazon rainforest is a big deal. It's a chance for these remote communities to connect with the rest of the world, access important information, and even check out the latest cat videos. A final programming note that admittedly is a bit self-promotional, as yours truly is on it. We'd love you to take a listen to our newest podcast, Only Malware in the Building. We collaborated with our friends at Proofpoint on this one. The show is hosted by Proofpoint staff threat researcher Selena Larson, along with N2K's Rick Howard and me. Each month we'll explore the mysteries around today's most intriguing cyber threats. We'll have a link in the show notes. Have a listen. You won't regret it. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes. Our mixer is Trey Hester with original music by Elliot Keltzman. Our executive producers are Jennifer Iben and Brandon Karp. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Hey listeners, we're always looking for ways to improve the N2K CyberWire network and maintain the intelligence-driven news experience that keeps you in the know on the latest developments in cybersecurity. We've launched our 2024 audience survey and would love for you to take a few minutes to share your feedback. And hey, there's even a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card if you complete the survey. Visit cyberwire.com/survey. That's cyberwire.com/survey and share your feedback now. And now, a word from our sponsor, 6sense. 6sense provides award-winning cloud-based automated endpoint and vulnerability management solutions to streamline IT and security operations. With its advanced platform, businesses gain complete visibility and control over their infrastructure, reducing IT and security risks and optimizing operational efficiency. With 6sense, you'll get real-time alerts, risk-based vulnerability prioritization and remediations, and an intuitive automation and orchestration engine so you can focus on your core business goals, confident in the knowledge that your enterprise is secure, compliant, and running smoothly. To learn why enterprises choose 6sense, visit 6sense.com.